Hi everyone. Just taking owner of this from the VinZero guys, so thank you very much for that. So just jumping across into what is Bimbeats and what it does. So just a quick very basic overview is Bimbeats is an analytics platform that gathers data in real time, so all the data about users, and the focus is around increasing productivity and getting an understanding of your digital footprint. So all the applications, all the systems that are currently being used in architectural engineering practices, combining all of that CAD and BIM data with a lot of the real-time business analytics information. So the real value of this is all of this data gets grabbed from these pipelines and then aggregated through into an analytics platform. So this can be useful for BIM managers and project managers and people like this. So this is sort of the initial value of what Bimbeats does. Who am I? Hi, Adam Sheether. I'm one of the co-founders and like chief CEO, I guess. Previously at AECOM and currently at Bimbeats, leading this. And then also who's not with us, but is based in the US is Conrad Sobin, who is our Chief Technology Officer, and he's previously worked at HOK and Grimshaw and the large architecture firms over there. So why did we build this? This really started as a consulting platform that we built a number of times for different organizations, and we started realizing that there are a number of problems that were occurring across these organizations. And so we identified that there was a need to build a consolidated, more production level platform. So the first one is really around the digital maturity piece. So understanding all the effort, where the effort's going, how much people are doing manual work, where your teams have like awesome little Dynamo scripts or using add-ons or plugins to achieve productivity. That was really the first part. It's just understanding how well people are using the tools and where the people were using these pockets of innovation, how to sort of identify that and share it with the other teams. Since then, it's grown a lot larger to include these other things. So staff well-being and retention. So this has become a really big one with a lot of the organizations we work with remote working, is really just identifying training opportunities, where teams need help on different things, where some of the knowledge bases internally might be lacking some information, and then combining that all with an are you okay footprint. So understanding, are people working late? Is there a lot of crunch going on? Is there continuous crunch going on? And identifying that for management to address. The other challenge is really working with IT on understanding how many licenses of all different technologies are used by each user. Are all those licenses are being used effectively? And then do the teams have the right hardware to support those technologies? So simple examples of people being on very small amounts of memory. Matt, as an example, had a very limited small amount of memory on a laptop when he came in, and we were able to quickly identify that we needed to double that by constantly getting that feedback that his machine was just maxing out all the time. So really making sure the hardware allocations are correct. And lastly, there's a significant focus on, I guess, your CAD and BIM applications. So primarily Revit. We provide a lot of information around downtime with Revit. Obviously, it's probably one of the critical applications in any firm, because when a project gets an issue or a major problem, it really brings down a team of up to 10 people for a few hours until it gets resolved. And then over time, projects start to get really, really slow, open, sync, saves, all of this churn starts to add up. So breaking this down into the core features of what Bimbeats does, it grabs a lot of the model and user data. So around your Revit and CAD working patterns, it provides duration metrics around all this information. So is your Revit model starting to get really slow? Are they taking a long time to save? Is it taking a long time to do things? It provides all of this data in real time. So for BIM managers, this means if a level gets deleted and 3,000 elements get deleted, you don't find out 3 hours later after 5 more syncs. You can be alerted about 200 milliseconds after that occurs and before a save. And lastly, it's scalable. So our largest customers are in excess of a couple of thousand licensed Revit users. And so the platform has no sort of limit in terms of number of users. what we actually plug into. So as Bimbeats is an analytics platform based on CAD and BIM packages, we really focus there. So we cast what we'd like to think is a pretty wide net around all your core applications. So Revit, Rhino, Navisworks, ERP systems. We have special integrations for your computational design rollouts if you're doing those. So Dynamo, Grasshopper, AutoCAD, but not just AutoCAD, all the verticals. So if you've got Plant 3D, if you've got Civil 3D, if you've got Advanced Steel, it takes that data into account. A whole heap of data around the PC statistics, what platforms are running, memory usage, CPU, and then some of your peripherals as well. So we've got an IFC data extractor, we've got a Bluebeam extractor, FlexLM, and BIM 360, and some of this data around the project and issue management as well. So sort of your core platform tier, and then also your peripherals. So who cares about this information and who uses it? So there's sort of 6 people that we've identified. So initially the core ones are guys like the BIM managers who are just, trying to get work out. They're not sure when things are changing and how often, especially if you're in control of a lot of projects. So the real easy wins here is because you get that real-time analytics across the board. You don't have to go and open every single model to find problems anymore. You can quickly review all of the models in real time and understand which ones have the errors that should be addressed. Okay. For your software developers and computational designer teams, so understanding, if people are using your plugins, so you've rolled out internal plugins for people or rolled out computational scripts, do they work? How many people are using them? Are they having any errors? All of that stuff gets captured. From a higher level with project team members, so understanding, are the right people using the right tools, understanding where teams are, capturing time in terms of total time to deliver projects, and then also understanding who are the people in these projects who really know what they're doing and pairing them with your less experienced team members. So getting a bit higher than that is elevating this stuff to executives. So a lot of that wellness data we're seeing getting elevated to HR, and Matt will have some examples of that. Pairing some of this data with your IT managers, because we get a lot deeper dive into some of the IT statistics and we provide it in real time. Some of the existing IT asset management tools provide some of that, but it really provides this nice mix between design technology and IT management where there's not a lot of tools that really fit both stakeholders there. And lastly, your project managers, you can get an understanding of, are people working on level 1? Are they working on the elevations? Is this package of work ready to be delivered? How long is the current work taking to do, and all of that sort of stuff. So getting an understanding of the pulse of your work. So getting into some of this managing digital expenditure, so understanding what's happening across the business, and then some of the best practices. So I'll show you some examples of how this looks. So a lot of this gets expressed in terms of dashboards. So your typical dashboards. So in this case, we have an out-of-the-box business intelligence tool, but we do have customers that also use Power BI and Tableau for some of this data. So here's a really, really basic indication of some of the information that you get out of a Revit model overview. So you can see here, we've got things like selecting a particular project, or we can get a list of every project, the name of the project, the ID, but more importantly, down below, we start to get these color-coded metrics based on what we've defined as good and bad practice. So simple things like, okay, Revit models at 447 megs, so starting to get larger on the upward bounds. 563 warnings is pretty good. Number of work sets, number of in-place families, a lot of CAD links, which is potentially really slowing down your problem, having that many CAD links, as well as CAD imported items. So being able to define these triggers to then correlate that with time lost in terms of open and sync is the real value here. So you can see as we get across the side as well, we start getting some indicators like there's a lot of filled regions. There's a heck of a lot of detail lines. So is this an indication in this particular firm's case of over 2D detailing and not relying on the 3D model enough, so that the BIM managers can get in there and start understanding, is the competency of the team there relative to the outcomes relied by the contractors and the client. Moving away from the Revit and just jumping across to the CAD and BIM apps. So again, all in real time, what you're seeing here is all of the data over these are each days as people are coming into work. You start to get an understanding of how many people just leave their computers on 24/7. So one is definitely your energy output. You can get an understanding of that. But two is the actual number of licenses of the different technologies. So this is concurrent Rhino use, looked at just this week, and getting an understanding of how many people, one, are just leaving Rhino open 24/7 because they don't want to give up licenses, but two, starting to understand those peaks and troughs. And where this can translate into really, really quick value is if we take a look at the next slide. So this is typical of what we see with architects with the Adobe suite. Is typically everyone gets a copy of the Creative Cloud. It is not a cheap solution. And so what we're seeing here is monitoring the usage of Creative Cloud. What we can see is, we've got 58 users using Adobe Acrobat, but that's the free PDF tool. When we actually look at the paid products, we're really sitting down, and this is over a 3-month period, of a maximum of 23 users of that license at one time. So again, you can start to see these discrepancies of, okay, everyone needs access to this tool, but we can start to see indicatively how many people concurrently are accessing this so we can go back and review our license subscriptions, especially in those flexi areas where you've got those options to start getting some savings there. Another really big one, and Matt's got some really good examples of this when he talks about how they've implemented this in ADG, but is the computational design organizational feedback. So what this is when you've got Dynamo scripts, when you've got Revit scripts, a lot of companies are building these. Usually it starts off as a pocket of people, and then they start giving them to their team members. So depending on the organization, some of them mandate this stuff. Hey, you need to start using these particular scripts we've written on these projects. Are saving us time. But what they don't have usually the knowledge or the ability to do is then capture all the feedback around that. So understanding, our users actually, we've deployed all these Dynamo scripts, management's made a call to, spend money and time on getting these things developed. Are they actually being used? If they are being used, on which projects? Are they all being run on the correct projects? Are they being run on every project? The failure rate of them too. So understanding where the scripts may not be complete or incomplete, or there's certain edge cases that haven't been accounted for. And this is usually the big one where users are usually pretty busy. They'll push the button, especially if it's a Dynamo player thing and people have been invested a lot of time. It doesn't work. They need to get the work out. They just go and do it manually. So understanding the amount of failures, and you can start to see some, pretty significant, 20% of the time this is failing. So understanding that. And then lastly, are these being run in Dynamo Player? Are they being run in just normal Dynamo? Have you gone and set up that UI investment? So this gives you a lot of that round trip feedback. And this can then be elevated to management because every time the script has been run on every project, you can start to get an aggregated count of, okay, well, approximately this is saving 5 minutes per, activity. Therefore, it's been run, 700 times. That equals this, and you can start giving this indicative ROI back to management. So when you're asking for additional time for the computational designers to invest in, more and more design analysis, you can provide that feedback and speak in a language that works with them. The other one that's become a pretty big one, again with remote working and also the rise of things like BIM 360 or Autodesk Construction Cloud, is understanding the network versus cloud infrastructure impacts. And there's kind of two levels of this. So what we're looking at here is this is the difference on average between networking and BIM 360 open and save. So obviously you can see here, there's a really big difference. And this is across, 28,000 saves. So this is quite a large organization, broken down by size of the file. So you can start to get an impact difference of how long the network and BIM 360 is taking compared to your current internal infrastructure. And Matt actually did a bit of a work around this, who I'll introduce shortly, around some of the latency comparisons here between Australia and New Zealand and the US with some of our customers. But the other key thing with BIM 360 is these median times are usually done from the organization's office. And with remote working, what we've found is there's been a lot of customers who have experienced massive spikes in open and sync. And it's actually due to the remote workers' internet connection. So being extremely, extremely slow. And therefore, that's holding up your sync and save 10 other people, especially on really large jobs, are then bottlenecked waiting for that project to come through. So understanding not only your internal network and BIM 360 for your office, but BIM 360 for your remote workers. And in some cases on really large projects, it has been something that's been discussed because it's really holding up everyone else in that queue trying to get these things across. So understanding where you sit in terms of your current download and latency really starts to add up when you're talking, 22 seconds or 1 minute, but 28,000 times, that's 28,000 minutes. So start to do the numbers on people sitting around and waiting really adds up. Going a bit deeper on some of the issue side of things is being able to set up these sort of Revit crash troubleshooting, and you can do this for a number of applications. So this is again feeding back into the BIM manager narrative of understanding exactly how many people have crashed, when they crashed, the PC that broke, where the journal file is, how long the PC has been on. Some people's computers sit on for very long times. They're not getting powered down. So these are usually, Revit's got memory leaks. It's just known. So these things happen over time. Total number of sessions over time. And then, CPU utilization and the memory utilization. So understanding, is the computer just running out of memory and that's why it keeps crashing? Is it a project related issue? But what's really nice is this is when you can bring it back to this pairing with IT. So you can use this data to get an understanding of trends and crashes, but you can also use this data to also automatically create triggers that might log an IT ticket in the system going, this user just crashed, here's some of the data. So IT gets this stuff fed back into their systems as well. And then diving deeper beyond crashes, this is where we can start getting into what I was talking about before, sending messages. So it could be to the IT team. It might just be a Teams message. So rather than looking at the dashboards all the time, you can set up these alerts. They can provide the data of what the issue was. This is a bit of a deep dive we're getting, and then exactly into, what the computer was, what the memory leak was, and all of this stuff. So you can create these sort of triggers that review the information and start sending this information to the relevant systems where people are. So that's really an overview generally of some of the things Bimbeats does. It's quite an expansive tool, so we've only touched on a couple of bits of software there. So what I'm going to do now is, rather than go through all of it, I'll let Matt take you through the specific stuff. So for those who don't know, Matt Wash is a Chief Digital Officer at ADG. He used to be our Bimbeats consulting tech whiz, but now he's gone in and moved into, don't know if they call it the dark side. They used to call the software side the dark side. But he's, the good thing here is you can really start to get an example of how it's been rolled out in an organization and getting used basically on a daily basis across multiple stakeholders. So thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Adam. If you can move to the next slide. It's a little bit of a lag, I think. Cool, so I'm going to touch on some real examples of how we've used it at ADG with a particular focus here on wellbeing and training. So one of the key insights that we found with hybrid working and when we went into COVID was getting transparency around being there for people and supporting people when we weren't physically in the office. So if you can jump to the next slide, please, Adam. So this is what we call our wellness dashboard. And what this is showing is activity by user across any given week, so that we can identify who are the people within the organization that might be consistently working long hours or working on the weekend or just irregular patterns of work. Everybody obviously has their own flexible working arrangement these days, and that's fine. So it's not typically a 9 to 5 that we're looking at here, but we're just trying to identify how can we help people out. And some good examples here would be, it might be that one particular project is under a lot of stress and it's that same project team that is getting worked a lot heavier than others. Or it might be that one person within the team just doesn't have the same competency as some of the advanced users and they're not using some of the automation routines. So this is a really good way of elevating that just as a conversation with the project leader and through HR, just to make sure that we're there to support our people. This isn't a tool at all to check up to see if people are actually doing their hours. It's quite the opposite. It's looking at opportunities to try and reduce the amount of hours that people are putting in and reducing that burnout, because we obviously want to have engaged employees. We want them to be doing meaningful work. We don't want them to be doing manual tasks. So this gets automated as a PDF to HR at the end of each week. And we're just looking for those patterns or irregular patterns of work to be able to identify, is it the same project? Is it the same project leader, or is it the individual that might need a little bit of help? So this is the overall wellness dashboard. We can drill down further into this to look at what activity was being carried out by that user. And again, this isn't about checking up. It's, oh, you're doing manual tasks. It's clear that you're, when you're working late, a lot of these things we have automated, and we can just raise the awareness of that to show them how to do some of those things that in a slightly more to be slightly more productive. So next slide, please, Adam. Oh, I've gone back on that one. Okay, in terms of training and understanding competencies of the users, because we are able to capture all of the add-ins within Revit, we can look at which add-ins are being used by which users. And particularly this is really useful for us because we've now developed a whole suite of ADG tools to do specific tasks that we know are much quicker than using the out-the-box tools. So what we have here is on the left-hand side, you can see what we call the super users who's regularly using all of these tools. And on the right-hand side, the novices or people that may be new to the business, with the intention here that if we can run some training sessions and then look at the uptake of those tools after the training session. So checking to see whether those training sessions are effectively doing what they're supposed to do, and obviously showing people how to use these tools. But it's particularly good with onboarding new people to get them engaged with the right people and put them on the job with a super user, so that that knowledge is transferred across the entire business. So this is looking at it from the ADG toolkit, but we can do this across all of our suite of add-ins. And the other thing is that with some of our add-ins, we've actually been able to stop buying those add-ins because we've said, well, we're only using 1 or 2 features within that suite of tools. We'll develop our own, we'll put it into the ADG toolkit, and then we don't have to pay for that add-in anymore. So tracking the use of the add-in is good, obviously, from a financial point of view, so we can minimize the spend, but it's really all about making sure that if we're buying and building these productivity tools, that they're being used across the entire business. Next one, please, Adam.
I do press it, it's just slow.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So yeah, the other focus for us as a business, particularly at the exec level, is just trying to identify and prioritize our digital initiatives. We have a lot of good ideas, but we've got to make sure that we're focusing on the right things where we're making the biggest impact. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Adam. So this is an overview of how much time our business has spent just waiting for Revit to open and save and open views and open sheets. Now, when I worked with Bimbeats and the team there, if we look at larger organizations and particularly architectural practices, these numbers are a lot higher because typically the architectural files are bigger. But this just gives a really good indication of an organization that has 35 concurrent Revit users, that nearly 2,000 hours a year is spent just waiting for Revit to do things. Now that 1,900 hours is effectively one person full-time. So with this knowledge, we can say, okay, what difference does it make when we follow best practice to those times? So what we found, if you can move to the next slide, please, Adam. Through the extensive studies we did within Bimbeats across multiple organizations, we found that if you reduce your file size by 1%, you reduce your opening time by 1%. And if you reduce your file size by 1%, your sync comes down by 0.8%. Now, if we look at that in terms of trying to aim at a 10% reduction in the file size, which is, relatively easy to achieve, that within our business, if we perform best practice and we check this on a regular basis, that by reducing file size by 10%, that's saving our business $33,000 a year in billable time if we're saying that it's $200 an hour. But that's only a 10% saving on a small group of people, or a relatively small group of people. So it really goes to show that following best practice makes a significant difference to the business, not just a BIM manager saying, yeah, we should do these things because I know that we shouldn't load in CAD files and we shouldn't use detail lines and in-place families. These things really make a difference to the bottom line of the business. So when we're communicating this back to the executives within the business, there is a desire to support this and make sure that these best practices are being followed. So next slide, please, Adam. So from an organizational point of view, we really want to understand where we're spending our time. And if we understand where we're spending our time, this means that we can focus on automating a lot of the manual tasks that are carried out within that space. So this study was actually done back in 2021, where ADG looked at where they were spending their time, and they found that most of the time was being spent as a structural engineering organization in post-tension plans and reinforcement. So the intent here was then to take a step back and go, well, okay, if we're spending that amount of time doing reinforcement and post-tensioning, what tasks are we doing that we could automate so we can reduce the amount of manual effort that we're putting on the technicians? So the studies that were carried out were looking at automating, moving the data from analysis into documentation, building smart components, and a whole series of ROIs were carried out to estimate how much time we would save if we could automate this. But we used this process by looking, just purely capturing the details within Revit around where our users were spending time to identify those priority areas. Go to the next slide, please, Adam. Just jump through all of these until all of the images come on. That would be great. Yeah, cool. So what we did here was we said, well, okay, we got 44% of the time spent doing reinforcement detailing and post-tensioning, and 30% in coordinating the models and checking, doing the kind of more valuable tasks. What if we aim to flip that round? So we really want to be spending the time that we're spending in reinforcement and detailing in coordinating the models and doing the quality checks on the models, and automating a lot of that manual effort. So if we move to the next slide. Sorry, I think I removed that slide. So when we came back 6 months later after automating a lot of those tasks, we'd actually achieved a 27% time spent in reinforcement and PT. So we actually exceeded the 30% target, and that was through automating a lot of those manual tasks, which was really useful. So if we break this down even further and look at where we're spending time in views and sheets, one of the easy wins was to look at how much time we were spending in typical details and general notes, and making sure we consolidated our efforts in this space so that we weren't repeating this on job after job after job. So one of the easy wins with general notes was that we created key schedules instead of just drafting views. We reduced or eliminated the manual markup process because the engineer just fills out the key schedule in Excel, and we use the Deroutes package to bring in the general notes. So there was effectively really no drafting time or no technician Revit time involved in general notes once we'd automated that workflow. And similarly with typical details, just consolidating all those typical details into a single file rather than duplicating them across multiple files, we made significant savings in understanding how much time and money, obviously, that was accounting for within the business. Next slide, please, Adam. So the use of Dynamo scripts, and Adam touched on this earlier, but this is what we looked at in great detail as part of that automation for the reinforcement. So we started out by building the Dynamo scripts and then converting those to Dynamo Player. But since then, we've now moved everything into the ribbon. So this kind of prototype to product evolution is that we've got an idea of the thing that we want to automate. We'll test it with Dynamo. We'll push it out into Dynamo Player to make sure it's doing what it needs to do and get the feedback, and then we move it into the button, into the ribbon as a button. So that's our workflow. But this just goes to show the frequency that we're using these scripts again to come back to the ROI that Adam mentioned around, well, if we want to invest in a person or a team of people to develop these scripts, are we getting the benefits that we think we're going to get from it? Next one, please, Adam. So communication of everything that happens in Bimbeats is critical. So none of what we're doing here is hidden behind or in a black box. All of this is visible to the right stakeholders, so they're aware of what we're doing. And this eliminates the problem or the potential problem of the big brother aspect of Bimbeats. We make this fully transparent at ADG, so everybody gets access to the data that's relevant to them. So if you move to the next one, please, Adam. So a lot of the project managers are more familiar with Power BI. They're not as familiar with Kibana, which is the dashboards within Elastic, which is where Bimbeats natively sits, but that's okay. So we bring that down into Power BI. So here you're seeing a dashboard that is really aimed at the project managers who won't necessarily know the detail of these issues, but they do get a good understanding of just, is it green, is it yellow, is it red, do we need to address these things, so that they can have a conversation with the BIM manager on those projects, and have these things got better or worse over time. So just tracking those metrics over time. But this is within the Power BI suite of tools, which is, for some of our project managers, they're more familiar with that, interacting in this space. And the next one, please, Adam. And similarly with our drafting team. So within the ADG drafting teams channel, we've got a copy of that same dashboard so that everybody can check up on their own projects and have a look to see the health of their projects in real time, which is really useful. Next one. So project management dashboards, we jump onto the next one. So this one is really how we feed back the ROI to the business. So this is just showing that, I think this was in the last 3 months, the use of the tools that we're building. So typically what I found before moving to ADG and looking at their uptake of scripts is that you'll get 1 or 2 power users that are actively using these scripts regularly, or 1 or 2 projects that are using them regularly, but very rarely do I see this scaled across the entire business where everybody is using all of these tools. So this, to go back to leadership to say, this is how much money we invested in these tools and this is how frequently we're using them, is such an easy win to be able to show that there are systems in place where when we roll out a new tool, there is training provided and there's the support there so that everybody are using these tools, not just 1 or 2 people. So this is really good to send that message back. Next one, please, Adam. So some of the other things that probably Adam didn't touch on is a feature within Bimbeats called Snapshot. So Snapshot does a really deep dive into extracting any parameters within any of the elements within Revit. So we use this to track how our projects are going in terms of how complete they are. So this one is relatively simple, and it's just grabbing the parameter of the title block, which is going to say what group of drawings does that sit under and at what stage is it at. So it's a really quick snapshot to see the progress of, how close are we to issuing this project? Or are we at 30% DD, 70% DD? How does this time with our invoicing? Are we ahead or behind schedule with our invoicing? So it's a relatively simple snapshot of where we're at using the model data to do that. Next one, Adam. Similarly, if we get advice from the contractor that they prefer, in this instance, to have the columns as precast instead of in situ, we can monitor the change in the model to show that, yes, we've updated from IFC 2 to 3 to move from in situ to precast. And we've really got a lot of evidence around the amount of time that it took to update the model to those new conditions, to be able to just have a bit more evidence if we're claiming variations on this work, so that it's clear that, we have a real number of the hours that were spent to do this work. Next one, please, Adam. And then I guess finally, Bimbeats has been around now for 3 or so years. And in the early iterations of the dashboards, all of the information was there, but it was actually quite challenging to navigate. Well, where do I start? Where do I go? How do I identify the key priorities within the business when there's so much data pushing through? So the latest iteration is now structured in this way, where you have projects, people, and productivity. And you start with an overview of your worst performing projects to be able to then identify and drill down into what are the actions that you need to perform to improve those metrics, to essentially bring down the file size. And then obviously, as we've seen, bringing down the file size means that you're reducing the amount of time it's taken to open and save Revit, and obviously all of the other productivity gains that you get from having a healthier model and your QA checks on your model, etc. But breaking it down under these pillars of projects, people, and productivity just meant it was a lot easier to navigate all of that data. And as a BIM manager, you don't want to be searching for what are the things I need to look for. So this was a great enhancement that was released at the end of last year and has really helped me in my role really get to the bottom of what are the key things that we need to focus on, not just being overwhelmed with so much data. So that's a very quick summary of what we've got out of it from ADG. I'll hand back to Adam to run over some of the frequently asked questions.
Thanks, Matt. So just a couple of things. This is just a pretty basic example of showing how easy it is to kind of get into the individual records. So it again, not to get too technical, but it is quite easy to break in, start drilling down, look for particular data just by typing in natural plain text. So in this case, Matt's looking at for the ADG toolkit, and instantly every time that the toolkit's been used as a record of that, there's a whole heap of metadata that you can query. So again, it's not that it's buried away in like a SQL database, which again was one of those things when we were building this. Those sort of technologies are quite challenging to use just for the general industry. So just being able to like find the thing you're looking for, click on the viz button, turn it into a dashboard or a chart, and then start going through the right presentation technique. Once you're happy with it, maybe changing, I want to see all 50 buttons of that, and then saving that off. And now you've got this dashboard that tracks all of those tools across your business. So it is designed where it can take from basic data, as you can see, to a visualization and an insight that you can use very, very quickly. And then once you've saved that, that's added to the library and can be shared out with others as well. And as Matt said, the last few years has been come a long way. We've got a lot of our clients around the world now. It's crazy. So a lot of the clients we work with, mostly larger architecture firms and engineering firms, a lot of them in Australia and New Zealand, as well as the US, is just an indication of some of the guys that are using this technology and have rolled it out. And this was raised in chat. How do you deal with the big brother problem, right? So there's always this question of, wow, you've stuck all this stuff on my computer, it's tracking me. The goal here is really about transparency. And as Matt said, it's really about user competency. We've never actually seen anyone take a negative approach to it. And the reason is because they're trying to get value of the software. I think if you were to create a culture of Big Brother, you're just going to end up with user losses. And especially in the last few years, it's never been more important to really focus on, I guess, the competency of users, making sure that they've got all the training opportunities and they've been given the chance and there's knowledge to show like, yep, they've been given all the things they need. They've got access to all the tools, but you can provide that targeted training now and that targeted messaging. And the best ways to do that is to give them access to the data, right? So if your teams have access to the information the same way Matt's teams have got this, it's going to be in company-wide communications. You're going to recognize some of your Dynamo or Grasshopper contributors who may be more introverted, but the results are there. So, not necessarily the person sending out the most comms is the person doing a lot of work. So understanding that transparency, but then allowing users themselves to go and investigate their own projects, their own skill sets and all of that. So we always just tell people be transparent, because the best value is when everyone interacts with the data and the tools, not just one guy sitting in an ivory tower. And yeah, we haven't seen that type of mentality, because it just, you can't, no one can have the job of just sitting there keeping an eye on everyone else all day. It's not a real job. It sounds like it's a problem, but most of the time people have work to do. And it's kind of interesting, because when we first built this, and Matt alluded to this before with our user experience, we kind of thought that everyone would really want to build their own dashboards. They'd be focused on building all their own custom analytics and stuff like that. But we really came to realize that people just want to do their work. And this is just a tool to help them do their work without getting dragged down into the nitty gritty of jumping through every project manually to figure out what's wrong, but more just getting that proactive reaction to this information. Lastly, probably the biggest one, or one of them, is where is this data? Who owns it? Does Bimbeats have it? The answer is it's really up to you guys. So most of our customers host their own data. We don't have access to it at all. So there's public cloud versions where you can use Azure or Microsoft or Amazon to host this data. If that's what your preference is, you can pick which region it's hosted. If there's a data sovereignty issue, it's being used on projects, defense projects, things like that. So we don't get access to any of the data as a business. You guys manage all of that. So it's fully GDPR compliant. The only thing we get is some licensing data on that the software was installed typically of anything else. So you guys own your data. Bimbeats doesn't have access to your database. So just wanted to keep that one clear. And with that, guys, we'll close it out if for any Q&A, if there is any. But appreciate everyone who still on the call and made it to this far down the presentation. Hope you found it useful and valuable just to get an insight into BIM, some of the things that Bimbeats does. We really only touch on a few things. There's quite a large area of other tools because it's quite wide that you can interact with too. So thank you very much for your time. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, have a good day. And thank you very much to Matt for joining me and presenting some of the insights in what ADG is doing.